You can now get a 30-day trial to experience The Athletic for free. Visit the link in the description below to try it now.
Hello, welcome to Tifo IRL. I'm JJ Bull and we're going to talk about Romelu Lukaku and the situation at Chelsea where he may or may not want to leave. And to do that properly, I'm joined by two real people in the form of James Horncastle.
Hello.
Hi, James. And Liam Twomey.
Hello.
Hi. So, first of all, Liam, could you please tell me what Lukaku did?
Well, yeah, so about 3 weeks before this interview aired and this story massively blew up in his face, he invited a Sky Italia journalist into his home. I believe it was the day after Chelsea's match against Manchester United in the Premier League.
But he invited it.
He invited it, initiated by him, organised by him, and did a wide-ranging interview which was kind of intended as part of this, well, James would be able to fill you in more, but part of this Sky Italia special love letter to Inter, I think with the express intention of building a few bridges with Inter fans. But in the process, he got to talking about Chelsea and voicing some discontent with the way he was being used by Thomas Tuchel, his broader kind of unhappiness with the situation. It was all unhelpfully vague, I think, which contributed to the storm that followed.
Yes, questioning Thomas Tuchel's use of him, I thought was particularly...
Yes.
Did he really say that? Is that what he said in the interview?
Well, so the first question he was asked after saying that, he'd put his hand on heart and he would swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. Was just, how are you, Romelu? And he says, I'm physically fine. Gave an update, I suppose, on how he's feeling, and then kind of paid tribute to the work that the athletic staff at Inter and the nutritionists at Inter had done to make Romelu as dominant as he has been over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And then the surprise was that in the same answer he said, I'm not happy with the situation. The manager has changed the system. And then he sort of went into that a little bit more. That there'd been conversations that, he hoped that the manager and player could meet in the middle, find some sort of compromise. And it was something that they were working on. I think because the question wasn't a direct question, it slightly jarred with the whole premise of the interview, which was, as Liam said, supposed to be entirely, exclusively about Inter, and Romelu basically explaining the circumstances of his departure, showing his love for the club, which he says saved his career. Yeah, just giving a bit more context on what felt quite a sudden move in the summer. So I suppose that was the surprising element of it, was how this indirect question led to a direct answer about Chelsea.
Yeah, the fact that it wasn't exactly a leading question
invited them in to say it as well.
Contributed to the impression that maybe he had something to get off his chest and that there might be some sort of agenda to this.
And the timing as well, right before the January window, was interesting, I thought.
Well, I think it was quite mischievous of Sky Italia to release it when they did, because as Liam said, the interview was done 3 weeks before it came out.
Right.
So why sit on it? I think as soon as Romelu left Inter, there was going to be quite a competitive race to see who could get an interview with him from Italy, whether it be Gazzetta dello Sport, whether it be Sky. And Matteo Bazzaghi, who did the interview, Matteo is someone who is there every day outside the training ground at Inter. You'd see him at the team hotel before Inter left and all this sort of thing. So Matteo will have built relationships with players over the years, and I imagine he will have tried to secure this interview, and he got it, which. As much as we say, why did he do this? This is crazy. I mean, in some respects, it's the scoop that a lot of journalists would love to have. And
gotta be careful of those journalists sneaking about.
So, I mean, I perhaps would have done it differently. I would have asked for permission from the club, or asked the agent. But you'd have perhaps got a very different interview.
100%
in that environment.
Well, let's start with, that's sort of the thing. So, it has been largely resolved now, sort of, ish. Or has it? But let's start with the Chelsea kind of reaction and what's happened in the UK. So, I'm led to believe that Chelsea did not know this was happening and did not expect it.
No, and that in itself is often a cause of anger at Chelsea and they're not alone in this. This is big European clubs generally. They like to control what's happening, particularly when it comes to access to their players. And
it's only a press officer the entire time. You can't get anywhere without a press officer next to you.
Well, yeah, and
There's one here for Tifo.
And they would probably argue that it's precisely for reasons like this, because players can't, they think maybe they can control every aspect of a situation, and you choose a journalist, you invite them into your home, you choose how long the interview runs and what you say. But then, for example, you don't choose when they run it or how they run it and how they present it and how it's aggregated. And there's lots of ways this can get away from you, and lots of ways from a PR perspective that it can rebound on you that you don't expect. And I think that's clearly what happened to Lukaku here. His apology suggests that he didn't expect it to turn out this way. Chelsea felt blindsided, and there would be anger from that purely on a procedural point of view, but also then they've suddenly got this massive firestorm to deal with, where this is a guy that you paid almost £100 million for last summer, your flagship signing, the guy who was supposed to be the missing piece of this jigsaw, an elite defensive team now with one of Europe's most reliable goal scorers. Not only has he been injured and not played at his absolute best when he's been playing, but now he's sounding off about a coach who won the Champions League a few months ago, who is unimpeachable with the fans.
Yeah, and then on the back of that, Chelsea being loyal to the manager over a player is something of... because they don't tend to do that with the managers, but Lukaku's just in the door. But then the players weren't happy, right? So there were discontent within the squad on the timing and what he said. Yeah,
I think the players didn't appreciate it. I mean, they probably understood that he couldn't necessarily control the timing, but there's the idea of why would you even say this at a time when you're still bedding into the squad? And that there's probably a sense as well of we won the Champions League last year. You have to come in and fit into what we're doing, rather than coming in and talking about how the team doesn't fit you.
What did they say? Do they go up to them in training? And how does that happen in the actual club? What does it literally look like?
From what we were led to believe, there was a meeting. Tuchel met with his leading players, which I think was smart from Tuchel's perspective as well, because he knows about the history of player power at Chelsea and how that can determine the fate of managers. So he was very keen to make sure that the leaders of his squad were involved in every aspect of this process. And the fact that the action they took against Lukaku, leaving him out of the Liverpool game, and getting him to apologise afterwards before reintegrating him to the squad, the fact that that was all done in lockstep with the players, I think really strengthens Tuchel's position. The players weren't happy either, because everyone, as I said, felt completely blindsided by this, and it's something that threatens the harmony at a key point in the season.
Yeah, it definitely does. And then, does it matter what the fans think? They've not reacted entirely well, do they? What's the reaction?
Well, like I said, Tuchel, if it was perceived that Lukaku was kind of setting himself up in opposition to Tuchel, and at the moment at Chelsea, that's a battle you can't win with the fans. Tuchel led Chelsea to an extremely unexpected Champions League triumph last season. As I said, he is pretty much unimpeachable at this point in time.
He seems quite intense.
No, and he's not really put a foot wrong in terms of what he said up to this, or I think in terms of how he's dealt with this. So his approval rating's very high with the fans, and Lukaku suffered because of that.
I think one of the things that jarred for me was that it came just as Romelu came back into the side, and he made an impact. He was scoring, he was winning penalties. Mm-hmm. It was like, okay, the man is back now. And sometimes as journalists, when you consider when to run a story, you think, okay, if I've done an interview with this player, if this player is doing well, maybe this is the time, this is the moment to run it. So I wonder if that weighed on their minds.
Just because people were talking about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that will have frustrated Chelsea and frustrated Romelu as well is this kind of, in Italy they call it stillicidio, which is still aside. It doesn't really have a translation, but it means the drip, drip, drip of information. And the day before they actually ran the entire interview, they just ran a couple of clips, didn't they? And the clip that they ran, or the one that created the most traction, was the one where he says, "Yeah, I'm physically fine, nutritionist, fitness great, not happy about the situation. Tuchel's changed the system," and that made you then think, well, if that's only an excerpt, what else has he said?
Yeah.
Has he been talking about Chelsea in greater detail? Which he did, in which he said, if there was one club I could go to, or one club that came in for me and it was Chelsea, I would go to Chelsea because I've been a Chelsea fan since I was a kid. I came here on my school trip. It's always a dream of mine. First spell didn't go as well, but that came out later.
Yeah.
And by that time, the kind of horse had already bolted. And as much as he did say, I've been a Chelsea fan since I was a kid, hearing him say this club saved my career, he'd like to go back at one stage in the future, he's quite ambiguous about the time scale as to when he would like to go back to Inter. I think that creates a problem, for Lukaku, in terms of having to regain credibility with the Chelsea fans as to how much he cares about the club. I have no doubt he cares about the club, but he needs to now have a run in the team where he's fit, he's healthy, he's scoring goals, and justifies why Chelsea came back for him for a third time.
Yeah, and there was also the kind of slightly strange comment that didn't fit into anything else in the interview, where he said, when I was at Inter, I was thinking about Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich,
the biggest
that's what all players want to. And it just, I don't know, I think the impression that a lot of Chelsea fans got, you mentioned they don't like hearing players talk about other clubs in glowing terms, but there was also like a talking out of all sides of his mouth impression where I think Chelsea fans wondered, well, even if he is saying nice things about us, how much credibility do we put in that? Because he's talking about Inter, he's talking about other major European clubs he could have gone to, and it's like, where is his heart? Is he actually a player without a country, or do we actually buy into this narrative of, this is a boyhood dream for me to be here, this is unfinished business?
Something I wondered about when he was saying that is whether he, whether naively, or maybe it's not naive is the wrong word, but he's assumed that because he's an intelligent guy, right? So he's maybe just being honest is something that is quite admirable in the football, and you get something out of them. I'd like that if more footballers were honest. They wouldn't, I know, but then there's always the little weasels in the press that are going to try and turn something into something it's not at the Athletic.
Yeah.
But him just assuming that he can be honest and people will understand what he means within the context of it, because he's not saying he wants to leave Chelsea immediately, I don't think. I mean, there might be in the subtext you could read into it, but it sounds very much.
I mean, he said, he'd like to go back at a time when he's still at a good level. And yeah, I mean, to be honest, we do live in an age when Zlatan Ibrahimovic, is 40 and is still playing at a very good level.
Yeah.
Cristiano. So, I mean, you look at the work that Romelu has done on his fitness, on his body over the last 2 years, there's no reason to doubt he can't play at a good level into his mid to late 30s if he wants to. I suppose in that sense, it doesn't mean that there's any kind of immediate desire to go there. There was the comment about Lautaro Martinez. What does the future hold for Lautaro? What happens if he comes to Chelsea? And he said he should stay at Inter and I'll come back. Again, that would go down well with Inter fans, basically telling Lautaro to stay. I mean, I don't think he needs to do that given Lautaro has signed a new contract. I mean, to go back on what he envisaged his next club being, I think, again, he was very honest about that. I can understand why he maybe didn't expect Chelsea to come back a third time for him. And perhaps he thought that chapter in his life was closed and was thinking about, okay, Real Madrid, Bayern, Barcelona, that maybe is the next step. I suppose if you haven't watched the entire interview, and you were talking about honesty and why he said what he said, he's in his home. He's speaking to a journalist who he will have had multiple contacts with. You can understand him feeling relaxed. And so as much as there are lots of contradictions over the course of the interview, I mean, I imagine that I contradict myself time and time again over an hour, just speaking as though if I'm speaking to a friend or someone that I know. And then you perhaps forget the cameras are there, you forget that you're talking to Sky Italia.
It's a compliment to the journalist in a way.
Yeah.
It comes across like that to me as well. I mean, let's talk about, so we covered a little bit of what the purpose of the interview is, or what we think it was, sort of, to have a chat. But in context, like, why did he leave Inter in the first place? Because there's something he talked about was that he wanted a contract extension because he loved it so much, but they couldn't offer him the contract extension, so he had to leave. But he had 3 years left in his deal, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. In normal circumstances, pre-pandemic circumstances, I think it would be understandable for a player, having achieved what he had done and the status he'd got, to say, right guys, we agreed to this deal 2 years ago, you're paying me this. I'm now one of the top 5 strikers in the world. And I think when you look around at the other strikers that he's measuring himself against, they probably do make more money than him, or did make more money than him at that time. But there is also an element of read the room. Romelu, it was clear this time last year that Inter were looking for emergency financing. They were even maybe looking to sell the club. And, Inter were, proposing to their players to defer wages, forego wages even. And so the idea that the club was in a position to offer an extension, and he doesn't say pay rise, but I think you're not asking for more years on another deal, surely. We don't know exactly how much Romelu was paid, but when they signed Alexis Sanchez and Christian Eriksen, it was felt that they were on almost the same money as he was. And Alexis is a guy who's on the bench for the most time. Very good player off the bench for them, very effective. Eriksen had a good 6 months in the second half of last season. Romelu's status and his meaning to the team, I think, was much greater, certainly than Alexis. And this had never come out that he'd asked for a contract extension. That wasn't expected to come out. What was expected, given the title that was given to the interview, that it was him basically explaining, that he would have stayed at Inter were it not for the financial circumstances the club had found themselves in. He dearly loved the club, that they saved his career, that he still has this very tight bond with a number of the players that were there, and that it's a club and a city and a country that will always mean a lot to him. And I think that the problem was that over the summer, he said, I would like to stay. When he was with Belgium at the Euros, I'd like to stay. That he was talking to Simone Inzaghi, the new coach. Again, the backdrop to this is that Antonio Conte walked away from Inter because he didn't think that they had the funds to build on what he'd already done at Inter. They sold Achraf Hakimi. And I think maybe some of the information that Romelu was getting was that they would sell other players before they had to sell him. And ultimately, this incredible offer came in from Chelsea, and Inter absolutely could not say no to it. Inter's owners could not say no to it, given their circumstances.
Could they afford to buy him back now?
Absolutely not.
Right,
no.
So you can't go.
No, and I think he would be aware of that.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the interesting context to this is that, in December, his agent gave a big interview and said, one day Romelu will come back to Italy. He loves Italy. But for now, I think Chelsea should enjoy him and can enjoy him. And then he went away to Dubai, and again was saying, he would like to come back to Italy at some stage in the future. And that meant the question was put to Inter's executives. Their sporting director, Pier Ausilio. Pastorello says he'll come back to Italy one day. And Ausilio said, maybe we could take him on loan. I don't know. But it was very joking. And then a week later or so, this interview drops. There's a hell of a lot going on with this, which made it, it was the only story in town to hear a player be this forthright, this honest about his predicament and how he feels.
And so soon after such a big transfer, like Chelsea have made an unprecedented investment in Lukaku. As you said, they've wanted him back for years.
Yeah.
And for after a few months, for him to be seen to be agitating for a move away, as you said, a move away that doesn't seem particularly feasible now that he's on top Premier League superstar money. An astonishing story, and it's the unexpected element of it, I think, that's made it such a big...
I think if he just kept on message about Inter, Romelu in his 2 years, he became a legend at Inter. Because, look, if you're going to be the face of a team that wins the league for the first time in more than a decade, I think you instantly enter the hearts of most Inter fans forever. And I don't think Romelu's legacy changes all that much by moving in the summer. And explaining the circumstances as to why it happened, Inter's financial problems, I think was important to him, at least. But you have the ultras in the Curva Nord, and they see themselves as, we are with this team forever. And anyone who isn't with the team forever until the end of their career is not up to their standard, I suppose. And so when Lukaku was sold, and Inter were saying publicly that it was the player who came to Simone Inzaghi and said, I want to accept this offer from Chelsea, rather than acknowledge the fact that in the background, the club was seeking emergency financing and had to become a more sustainable club. Romelu had to set the record straight or straighter than it was. But the ultras were very much like, okay, you're just like everybody else. You leave at the first chance of a bigger and better offer. And as much as he tried to mend fences in this interview, the ultras left a banner outside San Siro the day after, basically saying, the players who matter to us are the ones who stick around in a storm and not the ones who run away when there's the first sign of rain. And so it hasn't perhaps had the desired effect for Lukaku. But I do believe that was why Romelu did the interview, is basically to say, this is why I left or had to leave. Had they offered me a contract extension, we would be doing this interview in Milan and not in London. And I just think that is actually quite an honest explanation of events. And it's very difficult for Chelsea fans not to see this as about them, but it's not about them. It's about what happened between Lukaku and Inter and what was going on at Inter with the backdrop of their owners coming under real financial stress.
Well, let's talk a bit about his actual impact at Chelsea, because another reason that not every Chelsea fan will be happy is that he's not been phenomenal. I'm going to go to my little tactics board. I like playing with it. So you see me over here. Now, first of all, when he says the system's changed with under Tuchel, it's gone from, he plays a 3-5-2 a lot of the time, and the last game they played before we filmed this was this kind of shape here. This is not the exact team, but it's meant to be a central striker who leads everything at the top. Then you've got these two kind of 10s that come inside here, always have the back three and the two here. In fact, they played a 4-2-3-1 recently against Spurs, which worked really well. Yeah. With Lukaku leading that. But if we look at some of the actual stats, thank you Mark Carey for these, from The Athletic, subscribe now. This is some of the stuff that Lukaku's been doing at Chelsea. Now, see the lovely colours, they're going to show you what's going on. But the way he plays is slightly different now, and it's to do with, obviously with different players and different systems, it's going to work slightly differently. But key things, like at Inter last season, he was contributing a lot of assists and chances. That's what he was doing. At Chelsea, he is not doing that so much. It's still way above average, but not that good. Taking fewer shots. But what I think is interesting is when you come to things like the receptions in the penalty area, so how much he's getting the ball in the box and how different managers are using him. So Lukaku, I think, is like a poacher, like a goal poacher, maybe like the Michael Owen kind of bracket, really quick, but he's got a big body, so he can play as this guy who leads the line. It would incline you to think that he's going to be a target man or someone who can lay off the ball a lot, which he's half decent at. But he's actually really good at carrying the ball and dribbling, like over here. See, Inter, probably his best season he's played, I would say, he was getting the ball in wide right areas, which on the board in a second, and then driving with it, which is one of the things that made him so good. But at Chelsea, he's not doing that, because he's mostly, I don't know if you'd agree, but he's mostly in the middle, where he can't do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, he absolutely is. Tuchel has often called him the point of reference for the attack. And you see, actually, when Chelsea have played in this season, they've become a different team in the final third to the one that won the Champions League last year. Last year, they were a bit of a chameleon. They had these kind of interchangeable forwards that were whatever you needed them to be against a given opponent, apart from being reliable goal scorers. They pressed depending on which position they happened to be in at the time. The two 10s would switch positions with the wing backs and help overload defences, particularly in those wide areas and the half spaces. Whereas now, when they've got Lukaku there, you have this one fixed point that everyone is just trying to move around. And, we'll get into the lack of minutes that he's played and how disrupted this season has been for him. But I think that's been a big part of the fact that those connections between him and those other forwards and the wing-backs just haven't really been made at Chelsea, or at least they're nowhere near the levels of sophistication that they probably should be at this stage of the season.
That makes sense. And sort of what you're talking about there, I mean, the change in style as well. He's not passing upfield very much, which would imply that you're playing deeper, you'll be able to do that and play forward passes. You can't do it with the top player. So again, you're taking away a little bit of his skill set, link up passing down as well. So at Inter Milan, was it a front two Conte always played with?
Yeah, which is one of the principal differences with Chelsea. I mean, it was one of the best strike partnerships that we've seen in European football for a long, long time. But I actually think there's a lot of differences between how Chelsea set up and how Inter set up. People look at the systems and say, well, they're not too different, are they? Yeah, they always say 3 at the back, wing backs, it's the same. But Tuchel and Conte, I think, are very different. I mean, one of the compromises that Conte made sort of from October, November last year was, he wanted to play higher up the pitch, play with 2 wing-backs who are essentially wingers, Perisic being one, and Hakimi being another, 2 strikers, and the number 10 at that time, which was Christian Eriksen. And then he realised, okay, we're too unbalanced, so we're going to go back. And whilst he would later reintegrate Eriksen into the team started to play a lot deeper, and what they would do is play on transitions, because as you were saying about the carries and the pace that Lukaku has, it was all about creating situations and creating combinations where Lukaku and Lautaro could combine and one would turn and all of a sudden they'd have a lot of space to run into and beat players with pace and interchanges. And Chelsea seem to play a lot higher or want to play a lot higher. And those spaces for Lukaku actually to turn, as we saw when he won the penalty, was it against Villa with that long?
That was distance. A rare example of kind of into Lukaku, wasn't it?
That for me is, the kind of situations that Conte would try and create to get more out of Lukaku. And some if you look back at some of his goals at Inter, you're like, what are the defenders doing here? They're so high up the pitch. Why are they playing 2 against 2 against Lukaku in wide open spaces of their entire half? It's because Conte recognised that was how you needed to play to get the best out of one of the elements of getting the best out of Romelu.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I can try and show a little bit of what he was doing at Inter. Another point, playing with Lautaro Martinez, is that he makes a lot of pressures. He's really defensive, kind of like a pressing forward. So he would do a lot of the work. Like say it's Timo Werner, this is Martinez. He'd be the one leading the press and showing things, and Lukaku would be not doing that. He does far less defensively. But the kind of areas Lukaku's getting the ball in for Inter sits over here. So Lukaku would pick up the ball around a bit here and be able to drive. But like James is saying, he'd be able to go straight at people, and then you get the overlap from the wing back, which would drag defenders towards that. And then they're like, well, I don't know, is he going to pass it? Because you think normally what's going to happen with someone like Lukaku is he'd play a sort of pass out to a wing back or whoever's supporting, like maybe Mounts around him or something like here, to then go and make the run, the classic Alan Shearer type thing where you pass to someone specifically so you can then get the ball back. So you go out wide and then you can make the run inside. But because Lukaku is really good at carrying the ball and actually taking on people, he's able to, at Inter, run straight at them. Because if you start from a deeper position, obviously you get a run at someone, you can actually take them on and go past them. That's the benefit of it. And if, like Conte was doing, you're sitting slightly deeper, you have more space to run into. Naturally, right? This is what James is talking about, leaving 2v2. So James will be here, Mount will be maybe behind with these two.
I don't play for Chelsea, by the way.
Doesn't play for Chelsea, but if he did. So if this team starts to push up a little bit and the strikers are here, the amount of space you've got behind them obviously is massive. Like that's huge. But if this line is further back, the defensive line is deeper because you are the team in possession, like Chelsea normally are. Tuchel's very possession based and they like to counter press when they lose it. So naturally, with this position here, if their team's attacking, Silva's round a bit here. But if they're actually in possession, Silva's more likely to be round a bit here, like right forward. So there's less space to play with. But because you've got Werner and Lukaku, and against like really good teams like City, I think they try to use this, where they try to draw the teams out a little bit and then be able to look for the ball over the top from Jorginho or something to Lukaku, who plays out in this wide area maybe. One of the things Roberto Martinez has said about him is his best position is kind of this right inside forward. Yeah. He's not even a striker, which I thought was really interesting, being able to attack the ball on his left foot from here. But it's not worked with Werner. Werner's, is that because he's It's because Werner keeps missing shots.
Well, I think I thought when Lukaku arrived that he and Werner could have a similar sort of chemistry to him and Lautaro. But they just haven't been on the pitch together. Chelsea are almost too successful at winning the ball back high up the pitch because they pin most opponents back in their own defensive third for most of the game. And it means, as you say, that Lukaku is almost always playing against the low block. He's got his back to a physical centre-back, which that I'm sure that doesn't really bother him from a physical point of view, but it can sometimes just be harder to get the ball to him. So I remember in his first couple of games at Chelsea, I mean, he did a brilliant job of absolutely destroying Pablo Mari against Arsenal. But once teams saw that and they saw the way Chelsea were trying to use Lukaku, they started putting midfielders in front of him to screen those entry passes.
Like this sort of thing here, so that this guy would can cover this pass so you can't get into him.
Yeah, they would have at least one, maybe two midfielders cutting off those passing angles, so the easy, sharp forward 10-yard pass just wasn't there for Chelsea, and so they would work from side to side, and you would actually see Lukaku get quite frustrated because he'd be calling for the ball and it wouldn't arrive because he was just swarmed.
So I remember as United, I thought, because he played very much at the top as a target man, that's what I saw a lot from, his movement in the box is superb, but his movement in these sorts of situations when he's not getting the ball, I don't know if it's because he's doing what he's supposed to be doing or because, for me, he should be moving more and trying to get in behind, but I guess you get frustrated after a while and stop it, right?
Well, I also think, Conte, he was asked, how did Chelsea get the best out of Romelu? And the comparison he drew was with Haaland. Because when you watch Haaland at his best, he's playing facing to goal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's doing those kind of crazy kind of runs, running at defenders. The other thing that I think about with Chelsea is that you've got this kind of box in midfield, if you like. You've got Jorginho, who people could maybe compare with Brozovic, and he's the deep line playmaker, sets the tempo, gets the passing rhythm going. You've got Kante, who's dynamic everywhere, but I think even Conte would say about Kante that he was not someone who gets in the box as a midfield runner. The goals that we think of Kante scoring, usually those kind of like, oh wow, he's just scored from outside the box. What's going on there? And then more recently you've had Mount and Callum Hudson-Odoi. And I think Mount in some respects is quite similar to, he does score goals, he gets into the box. Callum Hudson-Odoi I think is more of a wide player, even though he's playing in these kind of half spaces.
Yeah.
Romelu would have Barella breaking off him. You'd have another midfield player breaking off him. And I think that helps, along with having a striker who is as busy as Lautaro in a kind of Luis Suarez kind of mould. That preoccupies defenders or defences in a slightly different way.
It's like he gets to hide in plain sight almost. If someone else is doing the busy stuff, like if he's got Hudson-Odoi running behind, they're naturally, it just gives him a tiny bit of extra yards of space. Otherwise, if someone's tight to you the whole time, you'll know from five-a-side even. You just can't go anywhere. You can't get the ball.
Well, the two people in the Chelsea squad that you would think could play that role are Havertz and Pulisic. Pulisic has done that a lot for Chelsea. I think he worked really well off Tammy Abraham for a while when more of a focal point number 9. They would very rarely get in each other's way in the box. They would move into opposite spaces and ask different questions of defences. And Havertz in Germany, as well as thriving as a false 9, which of course he had a stretch doing for Chelsea last season, he also worked really well off a fixed number 9 and kind of linking up with them, but also running beyond them and getting onto flick-ons or just little layoffs and things like that. But Chelsea still haven't settled on a consistent identity. They've got this hodgepodge of really talented different types of forwards / wingers / sort of creators, and they don't know which combination works best. Even without Lukaku, they don't know which three work best together. But with Lukaku, they haven't really had the minutes. Again, Havertz is another one who hasn't played that much with Lukaku. And I looked it up as well. If you just look in terms of base minutes, Lukaku ranks 14th in the Chelsea squad across all competitions. Of course, that ankle injury is a huge part of that. And then he gets unlucky and gets into the COVID protocols. Luck hasn't been on his side, but I think because he didn't really have pre-season, that deal was done relatively late in the window, they've had to try and figure it out on the pitch, and there just hasn't been enough time on the pitch to figure it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Did you want to play with the board? This is Liam Twomey's first goal in the tactics board.
I feel like Tuchel now. I can't pick from all these options.
Well,
too many different ways to go.
Show the Kai Havertz. I'm interested in seeing how you might work with Kai Havertz getting in behind, because that's really interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, what we saw Chelsea do against Tottenham was a 4 at the back, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was Lukaku with Havertz kind of drifting off and around him. You had Mount as one of the central 2. If I just get these guys out of the way and just show you the final third. Yeah, so Ziyech was kind of buzzing around this area, which is, I think, another way to unlock him. He looked really good creating for Lukaku with those in-swinging balls or diagonal balls through for him against Tottenham. The other thing that's really hurt Lukaku, I think, and this was a point raised in Michael Cox's excellent piece that's up on The Athletic about Lukaku right now, is that Chelsea's best wing-backs, Ben Chilwell, Reece James, even if you just have Lukaku up front with these two, say Mount and Havertz either side, that front 5 with those 2 really dynamic wing-backs, occasionally interchanging positions with Mount and Havertz, but primarily getting to the line, can deliver really good crosses. And James, I think, while not as fast as Achraf Hakimi, has the same sort of quality and intelligence in terms of how he delivers the ball.
Yeah.
And that's another way in which those guys really... When Lukaku was playing, Chilwell wasn't. It was Alonso early in the season. And then when Chilwell and James really took off around the time Chelsea demolished Juventus in the Champions League, Lukaku was out of the team. So we've never had all these different aspects at the same time. And now Chilwell and James are obviously both out for the long term. So you're looking at Alonso, who's a very smart player, but a less dynamic presence. And then just a real kind of, could be Azpilicueta, but he's not as good at getting up and down the field at wing back anymore.
That's right, that 4 became mostly a 3, I think, Azpilicueta holding the diamond with Jorginho.
Yeah, or you're looking at, a square peg in a round hole like Pulisic or Hudson-Odoi in that position, which is okay, but not ideal. And they just haven't worked out, even in those final third positions, how to get those crosses, what Lukaku's tendencies are in terms of what runs he makes, what kind of ball he likes. And so I think that's been a big part of where Chelsea have struggled with Lukaku as well. But I was interested to see against Tottenham them go to more of a 2 with Havertz, because I think that could work really nicely.
What I would say as well is, based on how difficult you see it is to choose the Chelsea starting 11, you can't have 14 players on the pitch at one time.
Well, yes. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we've got a really deep low block here. There's no getting through this. I mean, try and dribble down this side of the pitch. I think that's when Chelsea are playing their normal Tuchel system, that's kind of what you want to see, with Lukaku getting into the box or coming a little bit short, and then you have room for someone like Havertz to drift in. But if it's a 2, someone like Havertz and Werner, I think, can work really well with him. But they just need the broader balance of the team, which has been really affected by injuries.
Well, summarise it briefly by saying what happens next. And also, does it really matter?
Look, I think he stays at Chelsea, and I think he'll score between 15 and 20 goals between now and the season. I think he needs to be fit. He needs to, as Liam says, for the players to understand his tendencies and for the coach to understand his tendencies. He has to adapt as well. But he's not adapting to a league. It's a league he knows better than any other. You only have to look at how many goals he scored in it for different teams at different levels of the Premier League. So I think one of the things that came out of the interview is he likes to be provoked. And his teammates at Inter knew that. They would joke with him all the time, Barella, Handanovic, and that sort of thing, because they knew it would get a reaction out of him, and he liked it because he liked to be provoked. I just wonder whether that interview and the reaction to it will have provoked something in him.
It's like a Michael Jordan type thing where he's deliberately trying to get
I
himself
don't think he by any means deliberately wanted that reaction. Yeah. But I think it will cause a reaction. I mean, we already saw it. It was coming anyway. But before the interview came, he was scoring. He was getting into situations where he's better able to express himself. I don't want to use that kind of cliche about a point to prove. He doesn't have to prove anything to anyone. But I think it will get something out of him. And of course, if he just plays more with the team, we'll see a better Lukaku. I think Lukaku, and people find this amazing when you say it, is a top 5 striker in the world. And he will show it at Chelsea. It's just a matter of time, really.
And a final word from you, Liam. Harry Kane wanted to get out with Spurs a little while ago, and the fans don't seem to care now. Do you think this will go on and on? Do you think Chelsea fans will forget it? What's going to happen?
Well, the other interesting thing I thought of with all this was that Lukaku's made a big play always at Chelsea of, wanting to be the heir to Didier Drogba. Drogba gave at least a couple of interviews during his Chelsea career which were pretty pointed about wanting to leave, some of them during the season. And Chelsea fans don't remember that anymore. They remember Munich, they remember his Golden Boot seasons, they remember the good times. And so the test of what happens with Lukaku now is how he responds to this, how the rest of the team responds to this. They seem satisfied, and Tuchel seems satisfied that Lukaku is fully bought in and committed.
Yeah.
So that's the starting point. But then on the pitch, if he is what Chelsea need him to be, that's all that matters. And fans will forgive any of that. It will all be forgotten unless he does another interview. But if he just does his talking on the pitch, then I think, fans will be happy to forgive him because he just has to do what he was bought for.
There you have it. You can do whatever you want in life as long as you score goals. That's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is where the Ralph Rangnick to Manchester United story broke, where a team of journalists have provided unrivaled coverage of Newcastle United's new ownership and where dedicated writers cover every Premier League team no matter their place in the table. And you can try it free now for 30 days.